The presidency is the most powerful office in the free world. Through its leadership can come a more vital life for all of our people. In it are centered the hopes of the globe around us for freedom and a more secure life.
The war is going on in Vietnam, being extended in Vietnam, really because of the determination of those who are our adversaries, the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, National Liberation Front. I don't think a particular action takes place, military action takes place in South Vietnam because of the protests here in the United States. I think that even if all the protests were ended and even if all of the objections to the war came to an end here in this country, that the war in Vietnam would continue. I'm sure to some extent the fact that there are some protests gives some encouragement to Ho Chi Minh and to others, but I certainly don't think that that's the reason that the war is continuing and why the casualties are going up.
We meet again in the quest for peace.
Madam Speaker, I have a few questions for my colleagues. What if our foreign policy of the past century is deeply flawed and has not served our national security interests? What if we wake up one day and realize that the terrorist threat is a predictable consequence of our meddling in the affairs of others and has nothing to do with us being free and prosperous? What if propping up repressive regimes in the Middle East endangers both the United States and Israel?
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry.
I'm looking at this more from the angle of being a United States citizen, an American, and I think resolutions like this really do us great harm. In many ways, what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
I turned around and saw another pilot who was leaving his aircraft, and he had also jumped much the same way I did, only he had got a little more fuel on him and he was on fire. I turned and ran towards him. At the same time, people were headed towards the fire with fire hoses. Then, as I headed towards him, I got about 10 feet from him, and the first bomb exploded. And this knocked me about 10 feet, and everyone who had been near me were all either badly maimed or killed from this explosion.
Irving Kristol is not here because he died last year in September. but we are joined by his son, Bill Kristol, who will probably need no introduction to anybody watching this. Bill Kristol grew up in New York. Let's see if I know your resume. Yes. Used to be my boss, went to Harvard University, taught at Penn, worked for William Bennett at the Education Department, Dan Quayle, and now edits a fine magazine where I used to work called The Weekly Standard.
Families in every place in America have a relative of...
You are a distinguished student of history, and as we are all aware, that following World War II, a world order was established, which has held for basically the last 70 years. Do you believe that that world order is now under more strain than it's ever been?
I was certainly referring to the threats that we are now facing with this stated goals of this administration, which would upset the last 70 years of a new world order, which was established after World War II.
The establishment of Israel came about with a movement called Zionism.
I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
I do not believe that I should take money from anybody here and send money to Israel.
These wars that are 19 years and people are just there. And don't kid yourself, you do have a military-industrial complex. They do like war.
I think John McCain had a lot to getting President Bush, a lot to do with it, to go into the Middle East, which was a catastrophe. To me, John McCain, I wasn't a fan.
You all don't understand. We're military people, but we're people too. And the stress that we are under is tremendous. So I'll make a proposal before I have to leave the air. If this war is as important as you on the right and the hawks say it is,
our view is it should be a very short period.
Quite often about the credibility of the UN, and it seems
and so has Secretary Rice
yes,
recently.
and Rice has as well, but that seems to work in your favor when they do what you want them to do. But you violated the UN Charter when you went to war against Iraq, and you consistently lied to us about the reasons that we went to war. And this war was drawn up in Herzliya, Israel in 1996 with the project of a new American century. And, you know, why do you have credibility other than that you've just got the biggest guns?
May I ask what media outlet you're from?
Muslims Weekly.
I see. We did not violate the UN Charter in the war to overthrow Saddam Hussein, and that plan was not drawn up in Herzliya at the Project for a New American Century.
Congressman, you said something in an interview with our own Greta Van Susteren. You and I got into this on my radio show.
You know, I was the #1 target of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee.
And I am shocked, frankly disappointed, and these remarks sound like the conspiratorial, anti-Semitic remarks of people that we have heard from over the years.
I mean, look, I'll give you an example. Some of our so-called allies that we work with and we protect them militarily, they're sending massive amounts of money to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda.
Who are you talking about there?
You know who it is. What do I have to bring it up for? You know who it is.
Because you're running for president. Are you talking about the Saudis?
Joe, other countries.
And what you said was, quote, talking about Israel and, quote, Jewish people, they're controlling much of our foreign policy, they're influencing much of our domestic policy. What do you mean by that? Because that sounds to me like a bizarre conspiracy theory. Why would you say something like that when it's just, first of all, patently untrue?